Good evening, everyone. This CPOC Commissioner meeting is hereby called to order. The time is 6:15 p.m. My name is Hassan Bennett. I am the interim chair of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission, and I will be facilitating this meeting. This meeting was publicized properly pursuant to the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. I will now call roll. Commissioner John Solomon. Is John Solomon here? John Solomon is not here. Unexcused absence. Commissioner Melanie Du Bois.
I am present.
Good evening, Commissioner.
Good evening.
Commissioner Hakeem P.A.
Present.
Commissioner Hassan Bennett, myself, I'm obviously present. Now we will move on to Commissioner business. Approval for this night's agenda. Do we have a motion to approve this night's agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda for this night's meeting.
Commissioner,
Do I hear
seconds.
Commissioner Melanie Du Bois, motion to approve this night's meeting agenda. Commissioner Hakeem P.A., second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. In regards to the meeting minutes from last meeting, those are still being reviewed and documented. So in the next meeting, hopefully we will have those to present a motion and quorum vote on those. So now we're moving forward. I will hand it to Ms. McCleary, our Executive Director for Agency Business.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Excited to welcome you to our first meeting for the month of November. And so my update is going to be very brief, but important. So at the last meeting in October, I briefed the commissioners and the community on the fact that there might be some upcoming hearings regarding the Fraternal Order of Police contract negotiations with the city of Philadelphia. Since we last talked last month, that date has been set. The hearing is now going to be on November 21st. So next week on Thursday from 2 to 5 p.m. In council chambers. It is so important, community, that you come out and let your voice be heard about any things that you care about in terms of the police contract. But in terms of CPOC, we are asking for a very specific ask. Over 500,000 of you voted that we should be able to do independent investigations, and we have not been able to do that, and this is our opportunity. One of the reasons we haven't been able to do that is that some of the terms that would allow CPOC to investigate have to be bargained with the Fraternal Order of Police. So this is the time to let your voice be heard to your council members and to the administration, Mayor Parker, that you want them to help finish what they started. Mayor Parker was a part of council when she voted for CPOC. Many of those members were also there. And so this is the time to say, we want to stand with you, with the administration. We want to stand with you, Mayor Parker, and the other city officials. And we want to encourage you to finish what you started. And that's making sure that CPOC has its investigations. She has been a phenomenal champion of this office, has been a friend to this office. And so this is just really a message supporting her in getting us over the finish line. And so we would encourage you to contact the mayor's office, contact your council office. And if you can, come on out next week on the 21st from 2 to 5 to help us let your voice be heard, to be able to talk about concerns you have with the collective bargaining process, concerns, topics, but hoping that CPOC will be one of them. And you can also sign up to speak. They will take public comment from any member of the public that signs up. And so go to our website. We have put a lot of information up there about how you can sign up, how we could potentially help you sign up, information about the specifics of what we're asking. But the big thing is for this office to be able to do independent investigations. And so for those of you that are joining us tonight, we've dropped some stuff in the chat for you to be able to access. So that is my update. And even though I can't see a lot of you right now on this Zoom, I really want to see a lot of you next Thursday, or hear that you've been calling your council members in the mayor's office to just encourage them to stand with CPOC and make sure that we can do this crucial function that many of you wanted to have. So with that, I will see if there's any questions from the commissioners regarding the hearing that will be coming up next week on Thursday. All right. Well, we will see you there. Hopefully we will see you there. And like I said, if you cannot be there, you still have an opportunity to reach out to council, reach out to the mayor's office, and just let them know your support of CPOC being able to do investigations.
I'm sorry. I wanted to interject real quick. Is any commissioner going to be at the meeting, at the public hearing?
I am sorry I'm not available, but I am galvanizing representatives to make sure that they attend the meeting.
I will be at the public hearing, and I'm galvanizing the community members to be in attendance at the public meeting. I urge other commissioners to their presence to be there, and if you cannot be there due to scheduling conflict, have your community, urge your community to do as our executive director Tanya McClary said, and attend this public meeting, as well as let your voice be heard, let your stories be heard. Thank you, Ms. McClary.
And one more thing I forgot to let the public know is that you will have an opportunity to learn firsthand about the work of CPOC, the amazing work that we do. We are going to have a room set up right near council chamber where you can come in and look at our accomplishments, meet our staff. I will be there. All of my directors will be there. So the leadership of the office, our commissioners will be there. And so we want you to come and meet us, shake our hand, ask us questions, and look at all the good work that we have already done. And so we're asking you once again to come out and help us keep doing more good work. Our director of investigations is on. He is excited about getting his team ready to do these independent investigations. So you will have a chance to meet Director Cotto and ask him questions. So come on out early. I know it's from 2 to 5, but come on out early around 1 and come and meet our team. See the good work that we are doing and ask any questions that you have before you go into council chambers for the hearing. So come on out early. We'll have snacks. You know, people love snacks while you're walking around, ask us some questions. And so we look forward to seeing you next week, the 21st from 2 to 5. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my next team member. And I think we need to we probably need to pull the slides up at this point. Righty. All right, we can just keep going. I think the first slide's up. I can't remember if it's investigations, but we can keep going. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Investigations.
All right, thank you. It's good to see all the commissioners here tonight. I'm Nick Cotto, the Director of Investigations. There's a few sections in the presentation that we'll just jump right into tonight. The first section is on the police shootings in October of 2024. There were 2 police shootings of people in October of 2024. That brings the year-to-date total through October to, it says in the slide, it says 9. In fact, it's 11. So that's a typo to me. So there have been 11 police shootings this year, and that total includes every time a PPD officer discharges their firearm at a person. And the unit has a website on police shootings that is updated after they occur, which is available at the link in the slide. If we could go to the next slide, please. Great. Thanks. And so we're going to get into the 2 police shootings that happened in October 2024. The first, it was October 4th on the 3400 block of Willits Road. This shooting has been widely covered by the media, so I'm going to provide an overview of that event based on the facts that are available to us and the facts that are available in the media. On October 4th, a PPD homicide detective was in his personal vehicle at around 11:30 p.m. Officers from the 8th Police District responded to the scene after receiving a radio call for an officer assist and a report of a shooting. The detective, the off-duty detective, and another motorist had stopped their vehicles on the roadway on Willits Road. Preceding the shooting, the motorist had exited his vehicle and approached the detective's vehicle on foot. The detective was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle, and he fired his personal firearm multiple times out of the car through the glass in his car, striking the motorist who had approached. The motorist was transported to Jefferson Torresdale Hospital, where he was later pronounced deceased. So this is a case that's garnered significant media attention, understandably. We've received substantial amount of information and details related to this, and continues to be under our review and investigation. I'll pause there to ask if there are any questions about the October 4th shooting. Okay, Jody, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The second shooting in October of 2024 occurred on October 28th at the 3100 block of Custer Street, which is fairly close, a few blocks from Kensington and Allegheny. On the 28th at around 5 o'clock, patrol officers had identified an individual who we're referring to here as Philadelphia resident A in the area of Kensington and Allegheny. Philadelphia resident A had an open arrest warrant for allegedly murdering someone in the area in early October. Officers identified Philadelphia resident A and that individual was wanted for the warrant. 2 patrol officers approached him, and resident A ran away. And the officers chased him into a narrow alley on the 3400 block of Custer Street. This alley is, by the way, probably maybe a shoulder and a half width wide. It is very, very narrow. Philadelphia resident A had a .40 caliber handgun on him and fired at the officers. He did not hit them. The officers fired their handguns in response and struck Philadelphia resident A in the shoulder area twice. During that sequence, one of the officers also attempted to tase Philadelphia resident A. Resident A was arrested, taken to the hospital, treated for his injuries, and listed in stable condition. On the scene, the officers recovered the .40 caliber handgun that resident A had on him. I'll pause there to ask the commissioners if there are any questions about the October 28th shooting.
I have none.
Okay. This one continues to be under our review. Like the off-duty shooting, we received a substantial amount of information and material related to this. So we are continuing to take a close look at that within the unit. If we could go to the next slide, please. Great. So the next part of the presentation is on the monitoring activity that the unit does of police complaints that are investigated by IAD. The monitoring jobs include reviewing the complaint material that is either sent to IAD or through us, discussing the investigation with the IAD investigators. We will request and receive and review body-worn camera footage that's relevant to the complaint, and other video evidence if it also exists. We will schedule and attend interviews at IAD and participate in those, in those interviews by asking questions after the IAD investigator is done with their portion of the interview of witnesses, witness police officers, and the subject officer. We, with the auditing unit, help process the audits and assess the investigation once it is complete. If we go to the next slide, please. Great. There's some more material that I want to get through on the back end, but usually in this portion, I'll summarize specific examples of the sort of monitoring cases. Here, I wanted to be somewhat brief and just say sort of categorically the types of cases that we're monitoring and taking a close look at. Those are complaints alleging violations of the Fourth Amendment. So your search and seizure cases, your stop and frisk cases, searches of homes, searches of cars, that sort of thing. Complaints alleging lack of service is not uncommon to see. So we'll take a look at allegations that officers failed to render proper service to Philadelphia residents. And we also have a number of complaints alleging unprofessional conduct. So the officers were interacting with a resident or responding to a call or taking a police action and engaged in some form of alleged unprofessional conduct. So we would take a look at those as well. If we go to the next slide, Jody. Great. And so I wanted to take another minute to go into a little bit more detail about some comments that Executive Director McCleary was making about independent investigations, what they are, where we are with them, and what we need. Some of this is similar to what we talked about a month ago at the commissioners meeting. So I wanted to give a summary of what that is and add a few things ahead of next Thursday's public meeting. So an independent investigation, it's supposed to be impartial and an objective, a fact-finding inquiry to determine whether or not alleged misconduct occurred. One way to think about this is a common refrain you may hear from me in the office for any problem is, quote, what is the question we're trying to answer? And for independent misconduct investigations, the question is, does a preponderance of the evidence show that the accused officer engaged in the alleged misconduct? So just for an example, there could be an allegation that an officer used excessive force. So the question that we're trying to answer is there a preponderance of the evidence that shows that the officer used excessive force in a specific incident? If we could, we'll stay here for 1 second. Answering that question is answering an administrative and not criminal question, meaning if the officer did use excessive force in this context, the consequence may include some sort of disciplinary action, but it's not going to be a criminal consequence. The officer isn't going to go to jail as a result of our investigation and the subsequent disciplinary process. PPD has a multi-step disciplinary process to answer this question. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Great, thanks. And this is a graphic that I created to, in some ways, simplify and try to visualize that process that PPD uses to answer the question whether or not an officer engaged in misconduct. And as we go through this, it's important to note that answering that question using civilian investigators, using CPOC investigators, would increase the transparency of the police disciplinary process. So as we see, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here with this snake of a process, but you'll get a complaint. Shortly after a complaint comes in, there will be an investigation, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Once that investigation is completed, the job is not over. The case is not over. No discipline has been meted out. And there are a number of subsequent steps that have to happen. That investigation has to be approved. There has to be a decision about whether or not the complaint is pursued or dismissed. If it is pursued, it goes in PPD to the PPD charging unit to bring formal charges, misconduct charges against the officer based on that investigation. The case can end up before the Police Board of Inquiry, PBI, where the accused officer will essentially hold I don't want to call it a mini trial, but an administrative evidentiary hearing where advocates from the city will put on their case, demonstrate why the evidence shows the officer committed the misconduct, and the officer will have a chance to question the witnesses, make arguments through their FOP lawyer. Ultimately, if PBI panel finds the person guilty or recommends that the person be found guilty and discipline is imposed, that decision ultimately in this purple section means that the police commissioner is the ultimate decider to impose the discipline on the officer for that specific case. And once that's done, of course, the officer has the option to potentially file a grievance and pursue arbitration if they disagree with the sanction the police commissioner imposes. So what we're looking at here is a substantial, long process that the disciplinary process takes within PPDs. So let's zero in at the beginning on investigations, because this is an early foundational piece of this entire process. This process can't exist without an investigation, and the investigation can't exist in a vacuum without everything that follows, because the discipline hasn't been imposed yet. So let's consider the example I was mentioning earlier, the officer accused of using excessive force. To answer that question early on in the investigation stage, the investigator needs a host of things, right? We're talking about body-worn camera footage, if that exists, other footage, if it exists, access to use of force reports, access to witness statements, access to the witnesses. So we can ask the witnesses what they saw, what they heard, what they understood to be happening. Access to the witness officers, so we can ask them what they saw and heard, et cetera, and access to that subject officer, so that officer can provide their account of what had occurred. All of this information is critically important and needed to fairly and objectively judge whether or not a preponderance of evidence shows that the officer engaged in excessive force or not, which is why early on access to this information and access to these witnesses is critically important. So the rest of this flowchart can proceed fairly, can proceed objectively, and can proceed on a factual basis. If we could please go to the next slide. This is, okay, one more, Jody, thanks. So that's the process, and the investigation, the independent investigations that we would be conducting would fit within that process laid out in the snake. So let's talk about why that, some of the reasons why that is not happening today. Commissioners, as you're well aware, the legislation authorizes this agency to conduct these independent misconduct investigations. There's a legislative mandate to do all the things I just described in terms of gathering evidence, conducting interviews, et cetera. But what we need to look at is the contract that the city has between the city and the FOP. So Jody, if you could please pull up the other document briefly. I just want to walk through a few pages. Terrific, thanks. So we do have a legislative mandate to conduct these investigations, but let's take a look at this contract document. We'll start with the first page here. This is a arbitration decision that was decided by an arbitration panel. And to scroll down a few lines there, Jody, thank you. We can see on the left, the party is the FOP, and on the right, the party is the city of Philadelphia. So we're looking at a contract between the FOP and the city of Philadelphia. And if we scroll down to page 8, please. A little further. Perfect. We'll just pause here briefly because what we're talking about is within section 2, the awards section of the contract, which is going to lay out some specific terms of the contract between the FOP and the city. So if we could scroll down to page 11, we'll start looking at a specific section of the award. Oh, terrific. Yeah, that's good. And we can see at the bottom, number 18 says discipline. So there are a host of topics related to the award. The 18th topic is discipline. And so we're going to scroll down from this is page 11. We'll scroll down to page 12 and look at number 11. Okay, so this is the bargained term in the contract between the city and the police union, and the disciplinary section reads, the department can make other changes necessary to effectuate the Citizen Police Oversight Commission legislation enacted by City Council, but only with the written consent of the FOP regarding any matters that involve a mandatory subject of bargaining. I want to highlight that just so I'm sure the commissioners are aware of this language, and I really want to highlight it for the public that this is the language in black and white that, without getting too bogged down in a lot of legal specifics, is preventing the agency from conducting independent investigations without the FOP's consent. And so here, I'll just sort of raise the refrain I was raising earlier, which is what is the question we're trying to answer with all of this? I think it's this. It's what does CPOC need to conduct independent investigations? And the answer is that we need better language in the next police contract. If this is what the language is in the contract right now, today, the next contract can't have this same language. We need better language in the FOP contract so that we can do all of the things that I described to conduct fair, reliable, objective, and timely independent investigations. So like Director McClary had mentioned, this is why we're asking the commissioners and the public to advocate to the city to prioritize these sort of changes to the contract in the upcoming bargaining session, beginning with the public hearing before the city council next Thursday. So I wanted to take a few minutes to discuss this with you commissioners tonight because it's of course a critical issue for the investigation unit. If you have questions about these independent investigations or the monitoring or the police shootings, I'll certainly open the floor to any questions about the presentation.
Does any commissioner have a question or comment to direct to our Director of Investigation, Nick Cotter?
Sure, this is Commissioner DuBose, and Director Cotter, thank you for that thorough overview. I'm interested in knowing if we have given any consideration to identifying a champion on City Council that would help us to push this piece of the agenda forward.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner DuBose. I don't want to get too over my skis with the political aspect of how we get the political will to do this. So if any of the other attendees want to chime in, please interrupt me. What I will say is of course, we would like everyone on city council to be in favor of this, and I think there's certainly particular focus on members of city council that voted for the legislation in the first instance, right? Those folks that voted in 2020 for us to exist and for us to do these investigations, I think may be excellent candidates to back that up with support for this upcoming bargaining session, so we can get the ball rolling on independent investigations.
Before we send this question to our executive director, Tanya McCleary, I'm going to ask my fellow commissioner, Commissioner DeBose, are you requesting a name to be identified, a council member's name?
Not necessarily. I just want to know if we have on our strategic radar someone or individuals, plural, in mind that would potentially champion the cause within their own orbit. It's been our practice that if we have someone in-house that will help promote the conversation and promote the focus that we're reaching for, it's usually helpful.
So with that being said, can we get Commissioner DeBose an answer? And if we, without giving a specific name, and if we do have a specific name, can we have an executive session to discuss strategy surrounding this topic?
Hi, Commissioner Bennett. I'm happy to chime in on this quickly. And thank you for the question, Commissioner DeBose. We do a lot of work to talk with council, and I would say we have some very positive experiences with them being excited to learn about our work and interested in helping us advance the legislative mandate given to us by council forward. I don't think it's any secret that Councilmember Curtis Jones signed our legislation and really has been the driver of this initiative from the beginning. We continue to have a lot of support from his office, and that's incredibly valuable to us. Obviously, he has a lot of experience in the city and leading the public safety committee for so long. So I would say he's our primary champion, and we're always glad to have him on board. But I would say there have been many other council members that are also very positive about the ask, and we are communicating, to them in terms of the specific the legislative mandate that they've given us and what we are asking for in this round of bargaining in the contract. So it's an ongoing process. And Commissioner Bennett, your request for an executive session makes a lot of sense. I'd be happy to send an email around after this meeting so we can talk about scheduling that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other questions from any other commissioners for our director of investigations? So with that being said, I have a question. When the agreement reads the term ends on June 2024, and I'm just summarizing that, right? Does that mean the agreement is null and void then?
No, I mean, and
Or
again,
the arbitration decision is null and void then?
Not to get too bogged down in a lot of the legal stuff, but my understanding is that the terms of the contract will continue until a new one is in place.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question, and I appreciate the detailed reporting from you on a monthly basis.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of my presentation. Jody, I think we can close this PDF and probably get back to the slides. Great, thanks. I'll pass the virtual mic to my counterpart, Janine.
Hi, everyone. I just want to note my internet connection is apparently unstable, so I might have to turn my camera. Am I already frozen? Okay. I'm going to turn my camera off so I can get through this. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm just going to go over some of the audits that we have completed and talk about our process just as a refresher. So in July, our team started receiving full case files from Internal Affairs, digital copies of cases that have not yet been signed off by the head of Internal Affairs. So that allows our team to review these investigations and make any recommendations related to improvements that we think should be made to the case before it's finally completed. So an example of a type of recommendation we would make is that the investigator should interview all officers present during the incident or explain why officers were not interviewed. So those recommendations allow for our oversight staff to give some feedback and help improve investigations in a way that's really never been done in Philadelphia before. So we use the same series of questions to assess each case so that our reviews are consistent. So that's something we're really focusing on, is consistency across our reviews so that we can hopefully improve consistency across their investigations. We do these reviews. We have 10 business days to complete them and notify the department if we're going to be giving them feedback. So 10 business days is not a long time, especially as these cases are rolling in. So it can be pretty tight and takes a lot of hard work from our team to review these cases and all the evidence associated. So the next slide, you can go to, Jody. So I wanted to spend some time just giving some initial high-level analysis of investigations that we did over an initial 4-month period of this process. So again, we started in July, and then our last week and a half ago. So during that time frame, sorry, am I hurt? Is everything okay with my connection?
I can hear you, Janine.
Okay. Okay, good. Sorry. So just going through this initial batch that we did in a 4-month time frame, we received 148 cases to be reviewed, and these are all complaints that were made by residents against officers. So only public complaints made against officers. We were not able to review all 148, mostly due to just time constraints and our capacity. Staff was away for a week at NACOL, so that really kind of hampered our ability to do all of the complete 122 audits during this time frame. So that was a pretty high percentage, over 80%. Are divisional cases. So those are complaints that are related to more low-level allegations for officers who have no relevant complaint history. So those are typically going to be cases that only involve lack of service allegations or verbal abuse. So the department within their contract allows for officers to have these cases, when it's their first time having this type of complaint against them, handled at the divisional level by their direct supervisor, sort of no discipline being given out, but sort of a warning given to the officer about their conduct. So you can go to the next slide, Jody. All right, so of the 122 cases we reviewed, we had feedback for 70% of them. So 86 of them, we had some comments and some feedback to give, and we drafted response memos for all of those. Within those 86 cases, we made 229 individual recommendations. So that's a lot of recommendations, meaning we typically made more than one recommendation in a case. So if we saw a case that had an issue, it typically had more than one issue that we really wanted to bring some attention to. And the next slide has some of the most common recommendations we made, sort of show what we were finding, what kind of issues we were identifying. So the most common the most common recommendation that we made in these cases was that the investigation needed to address all of the allegations or administrative violations present in the case. So Firstly, we want to make sure that every allegation and everything that a resident is complaining about to internal affairs is being addressed in the investigation, just for the sake of thoroughness and making sure they're getting a fair investigation, as well as any allegations or violations that the complainant was not privy to that were still identified throughout the investigation. So this is something like a body-worn camera violation that the complainant wouldn't necessarily know about, but would be uncovered throughout the course of the investigation. So addressing all of those is a really big focus of our reviews. And our stance is that any misconduct should be addressed no matter how the internal affairs investigator learns about it, either from the complainant or throughout the course of the case. And then the second most common recommendation we made was to have the investigator contact all witnesses or make all attempts to contact witnesses or civilians related to the case. So sometimes an investigator would use only some of the contact information provided for a witness or not contact a possible witness at all. And so we know that witnesses are really, really important to coming to a true finding of fact in an investigation. And so just checking how they are reaching out to these people and checking that they're being thorough is a big focus of ours. So we think every case should receive the same effort related to witness context, but right now there's really not a set policy at Internal Affairs for how they do this type of outreach to witnesses and complainants. So that's something we're really pushing for as a result of these reviews. Okay, next slide. Thank you. And I referenced the missing allegations on the previous slide. So these are the most common missing allegations that we found. There were additional ones, but I was trying to fit some on the slide here. So the most common was this generic allegation the department uses for departmental violations. So a lot of things are encompassed by that. Any sort of rule violation by an officer may be related to a report they wrote or how they used the police radio in an incident, something like that. And then body-worn camera violations were also an allegation we found often that needed to be added in. And often, if we find one allegation or violation was missing from a case, there's typically more than one. So we made this recommendation in 58 cases, but there were over 100 total missing allegations. So typically one case would have more than one missing allegation or violation present there. And I mentioned body-worn camera is a great example of this. We know it's really important that officers keep their cameras activated for accountability's sake. So making sure that officers are held accountable when they aren't following this procedure is really important. Next slide, please. All right, so a few other common recommendations we made related to the investigator adjusting their analysis or their findings to match the evidence that they presented. So this is a pretty foundational aspect of investigations, presenting clear evidence and ensuring that findings are supported by that evidence. And we are trying to ensure that findings are logical and based on all of the information that's available in the case file. And a key point here is that ensuring that findings are accurate is fair to complainants and also officers. We definitely want, oh, we lost the slides. Thank you. We want the findings of an investigation to be fair to everybody involved. We don't want complainants having unfair findings, and we don't want officers having findings that aren't accurate. That's not fair to anybody. On the same sort of, or in the same vein, we really wanted to make sure that allegations were being listed against the correct officer. So sometimes someone will file a complaint and say, all of the officers I interacted with stopped me and frisked me. But in the investigation, it really comes out that, yeah, there were 6 officers there, but really only 1 or 2 officers took action that this person was complaining about. So looking at these findings and saying, okay, are those 2 officers the only ones being held accountable for this? We don't need extra officers with extra allegations listed against them because that is not accurate and it's not fair to anyone in this investigation. So we want these investigations to be very trustworthy and thorough from start to finish. So that's what we are looking at with all of these questions we're asking about these cases. Next slide, please. And these other common recommendations are related to the classification of the complaint. And the classification is very important. It's made at the very beginning of a complaint, right after it's filed. Internal Affairs will make a determination about how they're going to classify a complaint, and that determines how the case is handled. It can either be kicked back to the divisional level to be handled by a supervisor if it's only a verbal abuse, lack of service, a first complaint for an officer, or it can move forward to a full investigation. And making sure that classification is being done accurately is really, really important for accountability for these officers. So we made 14 recommendations about that. The classifications can't always be changed after the fact, but we wanted to notify Internal Affairs and PPD that we are looking at this and paying attention, and we'll continue to pay attention. And then something else that we're going to keep looking for is how investigators are summarizing body-worn camera footage or other footage in a case file. Having access to this is extremely helpful for us. And something we saw is that sometimes investigators are classifying or characterizing civilian behavior in a certain way while not giving officers that same treatment within a report. So they'll characterize a complainant as irate or belligerent or acting in a certain way. And then when you watch the body-worn camera footage, an officer is actually matching that and using profanity and being really unprofessional, but the investigators leaving that out of their descriptions of the footage. So we want to make sure that everything is accurate, that the body-worn camera footage is being used to its full abilities for accurately understanding what happens in an incident. So another inaccuracy we saw in one case was throughout the report or even in interviews with officers, someone was misgendered, and we found that to be really troubling. This report of investigation or interview memos, a complainant is likely not ever going to see them, but if they did try to request their case file or try to review something and see that they were being actively misgendered, that can have really devastating impacts to that individual. And we want to make sure every interaction that officers are having with residents is respectful. And we know that sometimes in these reports, if an officer gets promoted throughout the course of an investigation, they'll make sure they use the newest, most accurate rank throughout the case file to refer to this officer. So making sure that that same level of respect is being brought to complainants is really important. So we're going to call out things like that when we see them. That's not necessarily against a policy of Internal Affairs, but we definitely are going to say something when we see something. All right, so next slide. So this is a graph of the results so far. So we make these recommendations, and then what happens? We receive a response from Internal Affairs saying if they are going to accept or reject our recommendations. The graph is not properly showing up for me. I don't know if everyone else can see it or not. The sort of data points are missing, but I have some of it typed out here. So we haven't been able to log all of the responses we've received, and we've only received 51 responses. I think that we sent 86 memos. We've only gotten 51 responses back. So we're waiting for responses on a few more still. Of the 36 responses we've received and looked at and logged in, we've seen only about a 50% acceptance rate of our, 50% of our recommendations have been flat out rejected. And that's disappointing to see. And I think there's some follow-up conversations to be had about that. And especially in some specific cases where we are disagreeing with that rejection of our recommendations. Only 13% of our recommendations were completely accepted. And then that goes up to 21% when we're counting recommendations that were partially accepted. And then in some cases we flagged issues, but there really weren't recommendations that could be followed up on. The classification issue I talked about earlier is one of those. So sometimes they're not going to respond to a quote recommendation. We're just sort of bringing something to their attention, hopefully that they can look out for in the future. So there have been some common sense recommendations we have made that have been flat out rejected, and that's been difficult to read and very frustrating. So sort of figuring out next steps now that we've really worked out the nuts and bolts of this process, figuring out a process so we can be heard on those, and if there's any remedies that we can work out, we're going to try to do that. So that's sort of to be determined at this point. Next slide, please. And then I think this will be a really interesting data collection adventure for us. I think we can really dive in and take a look at these recommendations and what's being accepted by the department. We can determine if certain recommendations are more likely to be accepted, if the number of their accepted recommendations changes over time, and also looking at if certain types of cases and investigations have more feedback from us. I know anecdotally, investigations that involve stop and frisk issues typically are troubling. And so I know that those are things we look at and have a lot of feedback on, and being able to say that with data will be really impactful. So I just want to remind that these audits we are only doing for CAPs, so complaints made by residents against police officers. There are many internal investigations at internal affairs that CPOC does not ever see. So the hope is that encouraging consistency in these CAP investigations can improve investigations of internals as well. The same investigators work on both types of cases. So if they are consistently getting certain feedback, the hope is that they can improve their strategies and techniques over time. I think that might be my last slide. Yes. So that's it for me. I don't know if anyone has any questions, comments about anything I presented. Happy to answer whatever I can.
This is Commissioner DeBose. Thank you so much. I am excited every month about how thorough these reports are, and the fact that I feel like CPOC is really getting its finger on the pulse of operations. And I don't know the appropriateness of this question, but I'm curious to know whether or not during the course of an investigation, is the complainant ever aware of CPOC's presence on the case? Is there a mechanism by which CPOC gets to convey? So we're new, and many people don't know, and a lot of cases in the past died on the vine in the hands of PPD or IA. So I'm curious as to whether or not the complainants, the residents, are made aware or can be made aware of the presence of CPOC, so that they will, in essence, feel our relevance.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I currently don't think that they are made aware of our presence or our work. We don't have a process in place to really do that, but I think that's a really great point and a really great direction that we can think about. I know Tanya has spoken about trying to understand ways that we can increase our service to complainants and increase our contact and the ways that we keep people in the loop about process. So yeah, I think that's something that's definitely on our minds, and I'm glad you raised it because it's very very relevant.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that, and I'll probably have some recommendations, even in collaboration with Director Grimmage and the community relations, community engagement. And I'm just wanting to borrow a phrase from my grandmother, who used to say, "He that tooteth not his own horn, the same shall not be tooted." So I think that there's a way to increase our visibility and our relevance in the public by really, and I hear that these public meetings is an opportunity, but we can look at our board and know that there's limited attendance, but we need to get the word out that we're making a difference. Thank you so much again for that report.
Yeah, thank you.
Does any other commissioner have comment or questions? Well, I have comments and questions. Well, Janine, once again, to mimic the words of Elder, we thank you and we appreciate it every time you grace us with these reports. My question is, with some of these common sense recommendations, is there a way we can see some of these common sense recommendations that was denied?
I can share an example if that would be helpful. I know I was creating these slides right after reading a response to a particular case, so it was definitely top of mind when I was writing that out. And there's more responses to get through, so I don't know how representative this is. I just know that in one case, there was an example that really was confusing to me. So essentially, it was a case of someone who filed a complaint on behalf of their adult child. So that happens often, and people file complaints on behalf of people and the complainants therefore maybe did not witness the incident, but they heard about it and they're troubled by it and they want to report it. So that complainant who didn't witness it sometimes is wrong about certain details like a date or a time or location. And that is understandable because people don't have perfect memories, and especially if they weren't there. So in this situation, the investigator used the date of the incident provided by this complainant, this non-witnessing complainant, and investigated as though that was the confirmed date of the incident. And did not do it, and they found nothing. They found no evidence of this stop occurring. They found no evidence that this incident happened, and they didn't look any further than this very narrow single date. So they didn't look at the surrounding 2 dates. They didn't look for this person's name in general to see if they were stopped. They were like, well, this date, there's no evidence, case closed, unfounded, the end. And that felt really inappropriate because they didn't really do an investigation, especially given the circumstances of it being a non-witnessing complainant. So that was a very common sense thing to me. I have done these types of investigations before, and I would never end a case at, well, the date provided by this person was, there's no evidence, so that's it. It didn't seem right, didn't sit well with me. So that's an example. It's a pretty, I would say that's an outlier for cases that we've seen, but when something like that's getting just flat out rejected, that was problematic for me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I guess we'll kick it to our General Counsel, Catherine Twitty.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and suggest that I'll just make an announcement. We do normally have public comment at the end of the meeting. So if anybody is interested in making a public comment, please raise your hand or put that information in the chat now. If we don't have any questions, Chair, I'm going to suggest that you could skip reading the colloquy concerning the instructions on public comment. So let's give it a minute or two and see if we have those. But in conclusion, I do want to let everyone know that on our agenda, there are the dates for upcoming meetings. Due to the holidays, we have some slightly modified dates through the end of the year. We hope you'll join us when you can, and the videos will always be posted online. Additionally, PBI hearings are listed, the ones that are coming up. Please always call PBI ahead of time if you are coming. They do tend to change their schedule around or cancel things at the last minute, and we want to make sure that when you're coming, it's actually happening. So I'll sort of ask Jody now, do we have any public comments at this point? Any requests?
We do not.
Okay, then Chair, it's up to you. I don't think we have any other business. I'm happy to wait a few more minutes or close out the meeting at your convenience.
I like how you did that. What I will do is I'll read this colloquy just for the sake of procedures. If there's no public comment by the time I'm done reading this colloquy, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Okay? So this is how we're going to do it. All right? As always, I am going to read this colloquy word for word as a judge would when he's reading a jury instructions. So there's no discrepancies on a meeting-to-meeting basis. So with that being said, I'll begin reading the colloquy. We welcome public comments and feedback. Please address your comments to myself, the chair. If you would like to speak, please provide your full name. We will not be unmuting anonymous participants. If you are a member of the media, please identify yourself as a member of the media. You can indicate that you would like to speak by raising your hand and sending a request to the meeting host in the chat. You may also submit public comment through the chat. You will have 3 minutes to address the commissioners. I will keep the time and notify the board when the 3 minutes have elapsed. Any documents or follow-up communications can be submitted to CPOC@phila.gov. That is CPOC, the sign at PHILA.gov. Public comments should be limited to the topics covering this meeting. All public comments must refrain from offensive language, threats, or harassment. Participants that violate these instructions will be removed from the meeting. While we welcome your public comments and feedback, commissioners may not be able to respond to your questions or comments during tonight's meeting. Every attempt will be made to follow up by phone or email after the meeting. You can contact CPOC@phila.gov or call 215-685-0891. That is 215-685-0891. Do we have public comments at the moment?
We do not.
Okay, with that being said, can I hear a motion to adjourn?
Chair Bennett, I move that we adjourn tonight's meeting, having exhausted all that we need to hear and say in this moment.
Does anyone second this motion?
Commissioner PA seconds motion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you all for attending this public meeting of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission. And with that being said, good night.
Good night.